You always have to start with the question, why should the public elect or re-elect you? Why?
Well, let me start by saying it's an honor of my lifetime that the people in this congressional district have elected me to represent them in Washington, D.C. And I think that when you look at, if you're a member of Congress, if you're a mayor, if you're a state rep, anybody who's in public service of any sort, I think it gets down to really three things. And that is that you work hard. I mean, I make a good wage, and so I better work hard and make sure that I'm earning that wage. If something is going on, you better fight for the people you represent. And number three, you better get results. And it doesn't matter that in my first 3 terms that I served in the minority, or in this last term, I've been in the majority. We've been able to get results, whether it's getting money from the COVID relief package back here, whether it's just this past congressional session alone getting $100 million for the Rock Island Arsenal, whether it is making sure that I'm fighting for our family farmers who have been hurting desperately, not just because of what's going on with the change in flooding, drought, et cetera, but because of really bad agricultural policy, whether it's through trade or whether it's through the ethanol industry. So that's really the core, making sure that one of our largest employers is we're doing right by it, the arsenal. Our biggest economic driver is agriculture, so doing right by the family farmer, and small businesses, making sure that through our COVID relief packages that we are helping our small businesses and our families. So I've worked hard to deliver, and I hope that people will see that when they take a look at my track record.
One area that there hasn't been much progress in lately, as far as we know, is a second COVID relief program with perhaps another $1,200 check for a number of Americans. Is that something that you support, and should it be coming sooner rather than later?
I do support it, and it should have come not only sooner, but it should have come way sooner. It should have come months ago. So let me give you a little of the track record legislatively of what's happened. It was now 5 months ago that we passed what was called the HEROES package. There was money in there, more money for small businesses who are still hurting. There was the $1,200 stimulus check that would go to families, to individuals. There was help for our first responders. There was money in there for tracking and tracing and treating anybody who has anything to do with COVID. There was money for state and local governments, and we should, if we can drill down on that, I'd like to, because we have 150 towns in this congressional district, and almost down to the last one, they are hurting. So that was 5 months ago that we passed that. And if you remember the chain of events, Mitch McConnell said he was going to take a pause. That was his word. I think it's very clear that this pandemic has not taken a pause, not one bit. We are now 215,000 American lives lost, going on 8 million Americans who have contracted COVID-19. And so fast forward, while the Senate side has taken this pause, I go back out to Washington, D.C., we pass another HEROES Act. We call it HEROES 2.0 because we were willing to compromise. We brought down the price tag, which was a request from the administration. I was literally on a call with our leadership when President Trump sent out that tweet just about a week ago now, where he said, stop negotiations. I have no doubt that Secretary Mnuchin was on his way to the Speaker's office to continue those negotiations. So we have had tens of thousands of lives lost in that interim period from when we passed the first HEROES Act to the second HEROES Act. And still, there has been an unwilling partner to get that over the finish line. So my answer to you is yes, we need it. We desperately need it. Families desperately need it. The unemployed Quad Cityans and people all over Illinois and all over this country desperately need it. Our kids need it. But our economy will be able to get back on track when we have this parallel movement on getting past this pandemic. That will not happen without a national strategy. And this is something that we have called out for really since the start of this pandemic. We need a national strategy. Tracing, tracking, treating, making sure that the Defense Production Act is in play so we can make all of this happen. It has been, I believe, one of the biggest missteps that history will look back on this administration and say this was a terrible, terrible misstep that has harmed families all over this country.
We have gone from the Great Recession into the Great Pandemic, and you're talking about spending. America's debt now $3.1 trillion for this year. National debt just recently broke an astounding $27 trillion, $216,000 per U.S. taxpayer. Can we keep doing this? I mean, I know people will say you got to spend your way out of a recession, or you got to have this support for the American people and for businesses, but for the government as a whole, how can we keep doing this?
We can't keep doing this. But when you're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, when thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are contracting this virus every single day now, we have to first and foremost get past this pandemic. Even the Fed chair has said this is the time to make sure that we've got a full-on plan financially to get out of this recession and to get out of this pandemic. But long-term, we cannot continue to do this. But I think it's worth pointing out that the tax, and I call it a tax scam, that passed. I voted against it, but under this administration, where 83% of the benefits, 83% of the benefits went to the top 1% richest billionaires in this country. They don't need the breaks. It is working people. You know, the folks who are building our combines down the street at John Deere Harvester Works, the people who work at Genesis and at Trinity, those frontline workers who go into work every single day to support their families. I do something called Cheri on Shift. That I've done 100 of them. And the reason I bring this up in this context is because I work shoulder to shoulder with people who are processing carp out of the Mississippi River, or changing the bulbs in street lights from a cherry picker that's 30 feet off the ground, or people who are building, are making fencing. 100 of these different jobs. And when I work shoulder to shoulder with these people, I always like to ask them, what do they like to do for fun? And the reason I ask that is because it gets to people's disposable income. It gets to, do they have enough money to pay their bills? And then do something special for their families. And very quick story. Home care nurse, her husband worked full-time, she worked full-time, they had 2 kids. And when I asked her that question, what she did for fun, she said, we have cable television. Something that probably you and I take for granted, that we have cable television. And so I said, well, do you not like to go to the movies? And she said, this was pre-COVID, and she said, well, by the time you buy 4 tickets and popcorn and soda, we can't afford that. So instead of being able to afford maybe once in a lifetime to be able to go to Disney World, they have to settle for the Disney Channel. And I just think when I look at that tax scam and all those benefits go to the top 1%, and there's just a little bit left over for the rest of the 99%, that's wrong. I bring that up in context to the debt and deficit because what that tax scam did is add to the debt and deficit that we have in our nation. We were heading in a good direction with a very strong economy coming out of the last administration. And even pre-pandemic, our debt and deficit were growing by leaps and bounds every single year under this administration. And we do have to address it.
Affordable Care Act, when we're talking about health care, you've seen it being dismantled over the last 4 years. A more conservative Supreme Court could finish whatever is left of Obamacare. You have fought, of course, for the Affordable Care Act. What would you like to see if reelected as far as health care is concerned, and is it really dependent upon who is in the White House?
I think it depends very much on who's in the White House. I think it also depends on who's in Congress. And this is an area where the person running against me and I differ tremendously. Little context, I worked in healthcare. That's what I did for a living before being elected to Congress. And in that time I worked in healthcare for a decade. It was before the Affordable Care Act passed. It was during that time that it passed, and it was after it was passed. So I worked in that 10-year period. I've seen what was going on in healthcare. We were on an unsustainable path. The cost of healthcare was going up higher than anything in America other than higher ed. They were both going up tremendously. However, while those costs were going up like this, patient results, patient outcomes were not improving. Okay, so that's an unsustainable path. We pass it. And while the rollout was flawed, because it was, you can look at the first couple years of the Affordable Care Act and say, this really isn't working very well. But what's happened in the meantime is 22 million Americans have health insurance who didn't before, who were uninsured or underinsured. For the first time, we told health insurance companies that they cannot discriminate against anybody who has had cancer or diabetes or a heart attack or had a child born with some kind of ailment. For the first time, insurance companies cannot charge more for a woman because she is considered a pre-existing condition just because of her gender. So all of that was part of the Affordable Care Act. The fact that preventive care, for the first time, was offered so we could help keep families healthy. That's all part of the Affordable Care Act. All of that goes away. All of that goes away if the court case that this administration has taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court will begin to be heard exactly 1 week after this election. My opponent favors getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. She likes to talk in terms that, well, she likes the pre-existing condition part of that. But let me tell you, it's the Affordable Care Act is the only law on the books that protects people with pre-existing condition. There are no other laws on the book that prevent that, protect people with pre-existing conditions. So if this Supreme Court, absent Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with a new, what appears to be a 6-3 court, meaning the more conservative and the less conservative, the more moderate or farther left or farther right, is the 6-3 makeup. And that's on the ballot. Healthcare is on the ballot. And for the folks in this congressional district, this is what I do. I know healthcare inside and out. I know it from a very personal perspective. It's why I ran for Congress. My biggest motivation was the fact that my brother was on his deathbed when my predecessor was elected. And my brother died within a week of that election. And that election was about my predecessor saying he was going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act.
Have very little left time.
All right.
About 30 seconds
All right.
left. I apologize
That's
for
okay.
the time limit. Your critics on the Republican side say you're too much linked with Democratic leadership. Progressives say that you've become an establishment candidate. Very quickly, who is Cheri Bustos when it comes to the political spectrum?
I always find it interesting that one person or one group can see me this way and another group can see me that way. Look, I'm a lifelong Illinois, and I've lived here my entire life. I've lived in the Quad Cities for 35 years. My husband, who's the sheriff of Rock Island County, he and I have raised our 3 boys here. We now have 3 grandkids. One of our grandson was just born 2 months ago. This is my home. I know the people here. I come from a long line of farmers. We come from a long line of union workers on my husband's side of the family who, worked at John Deere. This is what I am. There's nothing that's fancy about me. My goal is to work hard, fight for people, get results. I do think it's worth noting because of the attacks that are on the air against me. 80% of the bills that I have voted for this congressional session, 80% have been bipartisan bills. 3/4 of the bills that I have written myself, that I have introduced, on day one, I sought out Republican co-sponsors. 3/4 of my own bills. So this claim that I'm, anything but somebody who's lived in Illinois my whole life, come from a long line of farmers and raised our kids here, it's not who I am. Again, it's been an honor to be able to serve in this area. I hope I can continue to do that. My goal will be to make sure that I continue to fight for people and do the best job I possibly can.